Greetings, everybody. It's Mike Yao with Fire in the Head Productions. Today's video is about Savage Kingdoms again, about the skill system within Savage Kingdoms. This is that game right there, the poster behind me. This is my other game, Red Sun, and this is Savage Kingdoms. Can't really see it that well in the video. I apologize. But today's video is about talents. The one I did like a week ago was on skills, and it kind of covered the way the skill system works in Savage Kingdoms 4th edition, and pretty much the editions before. But I mostly covered like the changes, the little subtle changes that occurred to help justify a 4th edition of this game because it's been 12 years since the first one. So today we'll get right to it. Is about talents. Just like skills, talents are one of the main building blocks of a character in Savage Kingdoms. They are, to put it to perspective with like some other game systems, Dungeons and Dragons probably the most notable. You have class features and you have feats. So talents in Savage Kingdoms really represent both of those things because it's not a class-based system. In other words, you don't get an automatic package of things. You do, however, have something called callings, and callings is kind of like your kind of almost like a class, but it's not nearly as restrictive. So you don't have these automatic class features. You have to kind of choose talents to help fulfill the outlook of that calling, and you're helped with that game mechanically as well. There's like a whole list of like favorite talents you can get cheaper and favorite skills and stuff like that, which I will get to shortly. So yeah, so just put that out there. Talents is one of the main building blocks of characters. Would be attributes, skills, talents, weaknesses to some degree, equipment, obviously. Those are kind of like your five really kind of main building blocks of a character in Savage Kingdoms, and pretty often in a lot of other fantasy tabletop games. So yeah, point number two. So that was point number one. Point number two. There are six categories of talents in Savage Kingdoms, 4th edition, just like there were in previous editions. Although one of the names of the categories has changed. We have battle, blood, mystical, social, subterfuge, and miscellaneous. So six categories. So battle covers probably pretty obvious. It covers it's mostly combat maneuvers. Although there's some talents that kind of represent battle type things that aren't necessarily maneuvers, such as the tactician talent or the mercenary talent or the captain talent. They are military related, but they're not necessarily a specific battle maneuver, which I'd say 2/3 of them are, maybe 3/4 of them are. We'll say 70%. So those will all fit in the battle category. And there's probably, haven't really counted, um, but I'm guessing there are 80 to 100, probably 100, 90, well, 90 to 100 talents in the battle category. The next category is blood, going in alphabetical order. So blood or bloodline talents are pretty much like they sound. They are more biological, more genetic in a sense, not to sound too science fiction-y in a fantasy game, but you know what I'm saying. So for example, like if you wanted to be she-blooded, that's in the that talent is in the blood category. Dragon kindred is in there as well. Goblin blooded, demon blooded, lycanthrope. You can actually play lycanthrope. And most of these talents, well, pretty much all of these talents are fairly expensive because they're supposed to be pretty rare. They can, I think one of them, they cost up to 8 or 9 points. Angelic blood, I think that's another one that costs up to 9 talent points, which is a fairly hefty price, but it should be. It's supposed to represent a very rare character type. So I think the cheapest one is goblin blooded. I think might be 5. Yeah, the next category we have mystical. Mystical is kind of like it sounds like. It's mostly a lot of the. I wouldn't say most. Yeah, probably most of the talents support the magical arts skill system within Savage Kingdoms. So it would support the magical arts, the 7 disciplines of the magical arts, sorcery in general. But there's a few other things too, like you can have seer or seercraft is another one, or second sight as it used to be called. And that gives you the ability to kind of see visions into the future, sometimes the past, without it actually being a spell. It's just kind of a gift that certain people are born with, like a lot of historical lore and fantasy lore. And there are other talents that are considered in the mystical section that aren't necessarily spell casting type things. Fey touched is another one. Meant you had some experience with the other world, the Fey world, and it kind of altered you a little bit, changed you in a way. Let's see. Death touched is another mystical one, which is kind of cool. Means you might have actually come back from the dead, or you had a really close brush with it, or an undead creature affected you in some terrible way, and it gave you these kind of abilities. Yeah, so those type of things. And then the more obvious ones are things like far-reaching magic, which allows you to double the range of your spells, or durable magic. It makes the spell last, the duration doubles. You have to spend another extra stamina point or two to fuel those. Um, that's what's some other ones. Evil Eye is a favorite. You spend an extra action making eye contact with your opponent, and you get a +2 bonus to your next your magical arts um, roll for. I think it's just Shadow and Death magic. Um, yeah, and there's some others as well. So this category, the mystical category, probably has, I think, 70, 75 talents somewhere in there. So we did battle, blood, mystical. The next one, the fourth category of talents, is social. Social is pretty much like it says, although there's a few that have sneaked in that you might not really assume, but most of them make sense. So those are going to be your crafting type talents, which I almost made a seventh category in this edition. I still might, but I kind of doubt it, but I might. Where it's just all crafting stuff. But the crafting stuff is also social, right? Because it is generally a tradesman ability, right? Which is part of society, which is, the whole social structure. Um, but some of these are like gambler, carousing, seductive dance. There's some really cool ones. Some of my favorite ones are actually in the social one. Sadly, I think they tend to get a little overlooked, but um, a lot of fun. Some of the ones in the social one can be really cool. Gossip is another good one. You're good at gathering gossip and lore on people, as well as rumors that are going on in the area, which aren't necessarily always true. But the next category, we have subterfuge. Subterfuge is the sixth category of talents. Those are pretty much like it sounds. Those are going to be sneaky, well, subterfuge, subtle sort of abilities, that your knacks and that sort of thing. Because remember, a talent represents, at least in this game system, and I think in many other game systems that either use the word talent or have something similar, like edges or advantages or feats. A talent is more a knack, right? Because otherwise it would be a skill. And at least in the Savage Kingdom system, skills are a little different. I mean, they're related in some ways, and maybe narratively, when we're talking in character and stuff, skill and talent is probably interchangeable. But game mechanically, skills are different enough to where they go up by skill levels. You put points into them. Watch the last video to see what I'm talking about. But if you ever played D&D third 3.5 or current Pathfinder or past Pathfinder, you kind of know it's similar to that a little bit. A little bit. There's a few little tweaks that are different, but pretty similar. You spend a skill point, which then becomes a skill rank. Although in Savage Kingdoms we call it a skill level. But Subterfuge has things like Secret Strike, which is kind of like a backstab or sneak attack kind of ability. Quick Stealth is another good ability. I don't have a list of the talents in front of me. I'm just kind of going from memory. Allows you to make stealth rolls at moving regular speed instead of half speed. Let's see, what's another good subterfuge thing? Hunter actually is in subterfuge instead of social because it's mostly sneaky. Also, you can choose it to be bounty hunter or just a regular hunter or huntsman. And so I feel like, especially the bounty hunter side of things, it's very subterfuge-like, subterfugal. Yeah. Anyway, know what I'm saying. And there's several others. Actually, I think gossip is actually in subterfuge instead of social. Now that I think about it. All right, and then lastly, the sixth category of talents is miscellaneous. Now that this category used to be called other, just the other category, but it got a little confusing because on the past character sheets there was a category for that said other in your skill sections, and it got a little confusing. Like, what does that mean? Right. It shouldn't have been that confusing, but I guess it was. So I just changed it to miscellaneous, which is, I think it's probably a better title anyway. So miscellaneous is going to be things that you think, things that didn't fit into the other five categories, things that are just kind of out there that don't really kind of fit at all. Trying to come up with some examples. Arcane object is actually mystical. Allows you to start with kind of like a minor magic item. Heirloom, I think, might be, although that could be social. Beast companions, definitely in the miscellaneous. Allows you to start with like an animal, a panther or a wolf or some kind of cool trained animal companion. In the miscellaneous section, and Fire in the Head, the name of my little publishing company, is actually a talent. because it does mean it's an old Gaelic or an old Celtic phrase for inspiration, right? To have fire in the head means that you had the inspiration, right? You had some sort of touch, or as the Welsh would call it, the awen. Anyway, so it is game mechanically, it allows you to come up with creative ideas, invent stuff. You can actually invent things that cost you a luck point because it kind of almost represents divine inspiration. And remember, even though it's called luck, in this setting, luck is really more of a divine thing. The reason I call it luck is I leave it up for individual characters. Say if a character is not particularly uh, has a deep belief in the gods or whatever, then he or she just might look at it as just kind of pure luck. Happen to be in the right place at the right time. But most people would associate it with the divine, which is more of the term what the term kind of used to be a long time ago. But um, yeah, so you'd have to spend a luck point to invent something. And when I say invent something, it's not like you're inventing a cannon. It literally says in the talent description, like it has to be in world. It has to be, remember the kind of grim, gritty, dark ages setting. So a good example would be like, I'm going to invent a repeating crossbow. That might not be too stretched out because crossbows already exist. So think about almost like enhancements to something that exists is probably the best way. Or if it's something that's completely new, it'd be something pretty minor. Um, suddenly you wouldn't be coming up with a combustible engine to put in every chariot or wagon, stuff like that. But you might know how to enhance a wagon to put like to mount a crossbow or like a ballista on it or something. Um, would be kind of a cool idea. All right, so enough about that. So point number 3 is prerequisites. So prerequisites or requirements. Prerequisites must be met in each talent. So most talents, not all of them, most I'd say probably 80%, 75 to 80% of talents, regardless of category, have a prerequisite, meaning that you have to. And if you remember feats in 3.5, I think it even used the same terminology. I think in first edition SK, I called them requirements, just to be different. But yeah, they're prerequisites, meaning that you must have it before you get the talent. So I guess it makes more sense. So these would be things like in order to earn like a learn certain, like it's listed in the talent, it'll say prerequisites. For example, you may have to have a minimum physique of +0, which is minimum, or a minimum willpower of +1 or something like that. Or you have to have at least 2 skill levels in crafting. And this means actual skill levels, which means training, not like your total bonus in that. Because your attribute, remember, represents your raw natural ability in something, and skill levels represent more like training, like actual formal knowledge of whatever that is. When you combine the two together, kind of like in real life, close, produces the final bonus or final result. Yeah, so prerequisites must be met, and some of them have quite a few. There's a few that even have like cultural or racial requirements. Because it's more like it's a cultural based thing. It doesn't mean that if you're not from that culture or whatever, you couldn't eventually learn it, but you would have to learn it in play, right? And probably with some downtime. Maybe be in that part of the world to do it, something like that. Yeah, or you might have to. What's another prerequisite that might be unusual? You may even have to have which is really rare. There might be one or two of them, even a certain weakness that you have to have, or there's a several that you can't have a certain weakness, like you can't have um, tainted in order to gain I don't know, one of the talents, but there's a couple that you can't have, or madness or whatever it is, you can't have a certain weakness in order to qualify for the talent, which, because again, it all thematically makes sense, hopefully. So those are prerequisites. The next thing would be point number 4 is talent point costs. So this is each talent cost anywhere from 2 to 9 talent points. And I'll tell you what that means in just a second. So they cost from 2 to 9, but favored talents will cost you less, which I'm about to get into. So each talent has a cost. The cheapest one is 2. I think time sense. Might be 1 or 2 other talents that are 2. On average, most are 3 to 4. Probably 3 is probably the median. I don't know if it's the average, but or 3.5 is probably end up being like the average talent point cost. So, but we have something called favored talents, which I will get to here in a second when I get into point number 5. Point number 5, you get so at character creation, you get 10 talent points from your culture or race if you're playing a non-human. Those are optional, non-human race. It is a pretty human-centric setting, like most sword and sorcery-esque settings. And then you get 10 talent points from your calling. Doesn't sound like a lot, but there's something called favored talents. Each calling and each race or culture has them. So, for example, if you and there's a whole list of them, so a character creation process, you start generally with your race or culture first, and there will be a list of 25 favorite talent. I think they're all 25 now. There might be some with 26 or something like that, but and those are what's called favorite talents, meaning that you pay 1 point less. Now the cost is actually listed next to it; it's already calculated for you, so don't deduce another point from it. And this will drag some of the talent point costs down to, in some cases, 1, and then some, might still might cost you like 7 or 8. But anyway, they're well, 95 of them are percent of them are reduced by 1. There's a 5% or so that are reduced by 2 points actually because it's very cultural and fitting. Good example is body painting with the Kimrethi. Kimrethi, almost like Picts in the real world, Dark Ages, late Bronze Age history, where they paint, they tattooed themselves. Suppose some of that might have been overstated, but it doesn't matter. This is a fantasy world, right? So the body painting talent, because there's a talent for that gives you like special cool abilities, costs 2 less than the base. I think it's 3 normally. For Kimrethi, it's 1. Just as an example, there's a few other examples as well. So yeah, so that means you can start off with you might start. You might start with like 2 or 3 talents if you get expensive ones, but you could. I've seen somebody start with like 7 cultural talents just from the 10. Maybe it's 6, but I feel like I've seen a 7 one time. Just getting cheaper ones, right? The base 2 and 3 point costers. And just know that this is favorite talents still are into play when you advance. I'll get to advancement in a few moments here, but when you advance, you can go back to the chart of your race and calling, and still buy those at cheaper. So it's not just necessarily character creation. The way that's justified is narratively is that because these are exposed, your culture and your calling are exposed to these things all the time. So even though your character may not specifically have that skill or talent, you've been around it enough, meaning that you could learn it fairly easily, which is represented by the favorite talent cost, the reduced cost. So yeah, so even after advancement, you can go back and pick those up for a cheaper cost. However, the good news is because it's not a class-based system, it's not fully restrictive. You can buy any talent you want. So if you say I got 5 talent points left. I don't really want any of these favored ones. Oh, let's check this out. Oh, this looks really cool for my character concept. It's 5 points. It's not favored, but you can still get it as long as you meet the prerequisites for it. So as we mentioned earlier. All right, so moving on to point number, what is this? Because I just put like bullets instead of numbers. 6, I believe. Talent points was 5, right? So stamina cost for some talents. So some talents have a stamina cost, meaning that when you use them, they cost bodily, stamina, or really stamina really represents more like mental or spiritual energy. I mean, there's probably some body attachment to it, obviously, but it's mostly mental and spiritual resolve or strength or fuel. Stamina points are. And so some talents do cost stamina points, such as heroic strength is a good example. That costs 3 stamina points every time you use it, which is fairly expensive, but it does really cool stuff. It allows you to like carry 2 full-size people without being slowed down for like a whole minute if you have to like rush them out of this horrible situation. It's the old Samson holding up the collapsing roof routine. You can do something cool like that. It's normally an out of combat use because there are battle talents that already represent things like that, like shattering blow that you could do with heroic strength. So heroic strength is more like out of combat stuff, or pulling a long ship ashore, or picking up a chariot and throwing it. Within it gives you some guidelines within the talent, so you don't get too ridiculous. Like for example, I feel like with heroic strength, somebody could throw a chariot maybe 5 yards, but probably not a wagon, not a full 4-wheeled wagon. Maybe you could probably flip it, over. Anyway, just use a little common sense mixed with cool heroism, right? I mean, that's really the guideline to most GMing, to be honest. All right, so moving on to point number 7. So mage talents are the only ones needed to advance in a skill level, and I probably mentioned this back in the skill section, or hopefully I did. If not, I'm mentioning it now. There's only one skill that you use out of the, what, 28 skills in Savage Kingdoms that you need a talent for, and those are the magical arts talents. And there's 7 disciplines of magical arts, right? There's air, earth, fire, water, death, shadow, and life. And so you need a particular talent to even advance in those skills. For example, if you wanted to be an air mage, you would take the air mage talent, and then you can advance in the magical arts air skills, right? Um, or fire magic, whatever it is, shadow magic, death magic, life magic, whatever it is, water, earth. So you would have to have a talent to advance in that. It's the only skill that does that. Even alchemy, which I thought about considering as that's supposed to be kind of rare, somewhat advanced, but it's also kind of happenstance in the setting right now. Like not everybody's quite, because I don't want it to be this like full written down science. I like a lot of mysticism in the setting. So I eventually just kind of went away from it. Plus the DRs, the difficulty ratings are pretty high already in alchemy. So if you're not trained in it and you have an average intelligence, I mean you're not going to be succeeding in most alchemy checks if you're even attempting them in the first place. Anyway, so it kind of takes care of itself with the difficulty ratings of certain things that you can do. All right, the last thing, point number 7 with talents is advancement. So just like any game system or most any game system, there is an advancement process. When you earn 10 experience points, you hit advancement number 1 in Savage Kingdoms. 22 is the second advancement. 36 is the third. 52 is the fourth. 70 is an, anyway, you see the pattern, right? The mathematical pattern there. So whenever you advance, you gain several things. You gain 5 talent points. You gain 5 skill points, which I covered in the last video. You gain +1 luck. And then every even numbered advancement, you gain +1 to renown. So, yeah, since we're talking about talents, though, we'll talk about the talent points. So when you earn 5 talent points, and it's very simple. You now have 5 talent points to spend on new talents if you want, or you can bank them. Say if you want, like, you earn 5 and you're wanting to buy this 6-point talent, you could save it up until you advance again and gain more points, right? So you can pool talent points. You can't really pool skill points because, first of all, there's not a reason to. Like just hanging on to it doesn't matter, right? So just go ahead and spend them. Um, but yeah, but talent points, many times there are a reason to hang on to them unless you just want like a couple of cheaper ones. When I say a couple, yeah, again, if you go back to favored, even with one advancement, you could pick up 3 talents for just, but they would be like the kind of cheaper, quote, less powerful ones, unquote. But maybe you're on average, you're probably picking up 2, I would say on average, especially if they're from your favored categories, either favored for culture or calling. Anyway, that's it. Wow, I actually did a video in less than 23 minutes. That's a shocker. Although by the time I sign off, it'll be a little bit more. Anyway, thanks for hanging in if you've gone this far. And I know I don't have a ton of traffic on this channel. That's just me talking with no fancy graphics, and I usually do it all in one take. I just don't have time otherwise. But thank you for hanging in and checking these videos out if you're one of the people doing that. I appreciate it. Savage Kingdoms 4th edition hopefully will be out. I know the publishing company is a little bit behind, but hopefully in the next month, maybe 2 at the most. It'll be out and for sale on DriveThru RPG and maybe a couple of the local bookstores around where I live here in Western North Carolina. So anyway, appreciate you guys. Like, share, subscribe, that kind of stuff. And I'll talk to you again soon. Thanks.